So now that we've investigated the historical examples of this Mars retrograde and debilitated transit, we can see many of the themes are already in play in the current day, in the present day, before Mars actually goes retrograde and becomes debilitated. So to recap, what are these themes that we're already seeing happening right now that we've seen already in the historical examples? Well, they are first conflicts over the resources of the country, Mars being the planet of conflict and the eighth cusp being other people's resources, namely the resources of other nations, as well as the resources of the citizens themselves, which are not already inside of the governing system, not already in the government. So to say, the privately held resources and wealth that is not being given already to the government via taxation. So we also see the ruling class being forced to re-strategize failed policies, but the new policies and the new strategies taking place in a very hurried manner, them being very flawed, and they typically exacerbate the initial problem. So these new strategies are usually kept as secret as possible because, of course, the eighth house, the eighth cusp, is the house of secrets and occulted things. So not always, but very often, we see economic turmoil and the Federal Reserve playing a key role in attempting to fix the cracks in a dam that is about to burst, giving way to a liquidity crisis. We see miscalculations in military and defense strategy that leads to unpredictable and chaotic consequences, such as the Bay of Pigs' failed invasion of Cuba, the handling of the Iranian demonstrations, and of course the FBI's failure to prevent the World Trade Center bombing. And finally, we see a sense of panic and impending emergencies that are handled very emotionally rather than with cold and direct logic. So we see a kind of the sense of emergency that happens when things went wrong, and then a very kind of hesitant response or a very impulsive response that results in very erratic and, of course, unintended or haphazard consequences because of those decisions. So now let's take a look at the 2024-2025 transit chart for the United States for this upcoming Mars retrograde period. And I'll get into the specifics of the transits and also the current geopolitical atmosphere and the current events currently unfolding in the United States. So firstly, Mars goes retrograde during the evening of December 6th at 6 degrees Leo. From December 27th until January 6th, Mars is in opposition to Pluto in the sky, then continues to be in opposition to Pluto in the US natal chart until January 15th. So we can expect a very strong Mars-Pluto energy at the beginning of this year, which is characterized as the culmination of a conflict or a struggle, where victory is at hand and the opposition secedes and they are defeated, or the struggle enters into its most intense and heated phase, when there is a very strong confrontational sentiment happening. So the phrase World War III has been on everyone's lips these days. So we can see that this will become a very intense period between the Russian and United States diplomatic relations on how to handle the winding down of the Ukraine conflict. Basically, in early January, there will be this major moment of a decision having to be made about the future of the conflict, and it can be a very intense decision point when, say, both sides declare some kind of victory or the conflict enters into a new level of heated exchange when the conflict is not resolved and it enters into another, it gets leveled up instead of leveled down. And also keep in mind, after Mars goes direct, it'll make its final opposition to Pluto, the third time in the past couple months, to Pluto in the sky. So from April 24th until May 5th, that's when that final opposition Mars-Pluto will be happening. So the decisions and negotiations being made in early January will have their results played out and become visible, what those results are, by early May. So this Mars opposition to Pluto also applies to the conflict with the United States' full backing of the wars with having to deal with Israel. So we should expect the same kind of culminating effects on that front during this time period as well. So since Mars is weak and retrograde, we can expect some aspect of all of these negotiations and revised strategies to play out in very unexpected ways, where the US will appear to be in control, but loses its grip on full control of the situation, which can mean events spiraling into very uncertain and even dangerous territory. So I'm optimistic that some kind of deal can be made to end these ongoing conflicts in Ukraine and in Gaza and the Middle Eastern conflicts in general, and of course with the antagonism with Iran. But I suspect that there will be some kind of rogue factor that will not be planned for, that will you could say throw a wrench into the situation. But it all comes down to that weak, debilitated Mars. There will be some kind of unexpected move done by one of the sides that forces everyone to rethink and re-strategize what they were planning to do from the outset. But hopefully this happens in an unsuspected but fortunate manner rather than an unfortunate manner. So another very important transit happening this year during this Mars retrograde and debilitated period is that Jupiter is retrograding over the 7th house of the United States. So the 7th house is foreign affairs, diplomatic relationships with other countries, and Jupiter is the planet of wealth and prosperity. So President-elect Trump has already spoken a lot about tariffs and readjusting his attitude and his posture toward the funding of NATO, and the European nations are already reeling and panicking at the notion that they're going to have to fight NATO's wars using their own soldiers and having to buy their weapons from the United States instead of receiving all of their weapons for free. So Jupiter is also the planet of divine as well as material justice. So Jupiter transiting over the 7th will cause a re-examination over what is economically just with regards to the United States and other countries. And I also think that the immigration issue in the United States will take on a very strong tone as being important, economically beneficial to the United States and not just of security. So important days of this transit are January 19th to January 22nd, when Mars is retrograde and debilitated over the US natal Mercury, which is the lord of the 7th house of diplomacy. That's also the lord of the 9th house of the law. So Jupiter will be retrograde and within 1 degree of the 7th house on these days. So keep in mind that period, January 19th to January 22nd, and that is the inauguration period of Trump. So in the historical examples, we see very prominent events happen when Mars is retrograde exactly over the 8th house, which will be from January 27th to February 4th. So keep that time period as important as well. So we're expecting many executive orders from Trump in his first few days and first few weeks in office. And again, because of the weak, debilitated Mars, I think the effects of these orders and these first few decisions that he's going to be making in office as soon as he gets in will have many unintended negative consequences despite his intentions and despite the intentions of his administration. I think there will be many mistakes in Trump's first 100 days in office that we're going to look back on as having been strategically misguided and even very impulsive in terms of wanting problems to be resolved immediately that cannot be resolved immediately. Another important transit worth mentioning is the Rahu-Neptune conjunction very near the 4th house of the United States, which is also during this exact time period. So I believe this will result in sudden changes in domestic policies, changes that are unclear as to their long-term effect, because Neptune is the planet of change, of introspection, of fantasy, and also of deception, and especially self-deception. And Rahu is sudden extroverted bursts of energy and also impulsive desires and the creating of illusions or illusions that cloud our understanding of the actual situation at hand. So you can think of this conjunction as kind of dangerous because it creates this self-deception and these impulsive actions based on deep-seated but oftentimes misguided desires. So the 4th house is the land itself. So this energy taking place will happen in territorial disputes and either on the northern or southern borders of the United States or borders internationally that the United States has a vested interest in defending. So you can see that this Neptune and Rahu conjunction near the 4th house does play into this idea of immigration being a very important topic and and events happening and decisions being made that can have a tinge of fantasy or illusion to them and being very misguided in the realm of fourth house issues, so the land. So we could see a lot of mistakes being made of how this immigration policy is handled despite the intentions of the Trump administration. So Mars goes direct on the night of February 23rd. So take note of the energetic shift or shifts within yourself on February 23rd and 24th. So it's important to remember that date as well. So another important time period, while Mars will still be in Cancer but direct, is between March 15th and April 12th, when both Mercury and Venus will be retrograde and transiting over the fourth house of the United States. Again, as a big fourth house concentration happening. And the fourth house is the heartfelt emotions of people. And it's also the territory you stand upon, so the land of the United States. So the key date within this period is April 3rd and April 4th, when the sun will be in opposition to the natal Saturn of the United States. And Saturn is the lord of the second house of finance, while Jupiter will also be trining that natal Saturn and sextile the transiting sun. So Mars will be conjunct the natal Mercury, the lord of the ninth and the lord of the seventh. Also, Mercury will be giving a trine aspect to that big cluster of planets in Pisces. So there's a lot of trine aspects happening here, and these are harmonious aspects. So this period could be of between March 15th and April 12th. Can be a period of great optimism about the quote-unquote house cleaning being done by the Trump administration. And there can be a very strong highlight, as I mentioned, on the domestic economy and the domestic affairs in general. The fourth house is our home. So Uranus also is playing a part, transiting Uranus, by sextiling Mars. So this also supports a kind of inspired sense of newness and renewal happening. Uranus is that kind of inspiration for new things to come about. So there's going to be this kind of breath of fresh air sentiment, at least by the supporters of Trump or people that may not fully support him, but the desire to see something new happen. There's going to be that sensation in the early first 100 days, first few months of the administration. However, having so many planets in one area of the chart overwhelms that area of the chart. And in this case, it's the fourth house. So despite this optimism and fresh outlook and newness, I believe that underneath the surface, there's going to be a lot of chaos, the feeling of chaos waiting to be unleashed. And at a minimum, a great amount of uncertainty about what the future will hold. But it's going to have this kind of optimistic facade. So I think there's going to be a lot of uneasiness that people are not going to know how to really verbalize. And it's going to be kind of this foreboding sense. But on the surface, everything is fine, or we're taking care of business, that kind of sensation. But that heavy fourth house emphasis is going to kind of create that interior sense that there's something kind of overwhelming taking place. And again, with this Mars retrograde debilitated, also as the bigger context, is that emotional decisions getting made, unintended consequences, under the surface dealings that we're not really aware of, and those decisions having short, mid, and then eventually long-term effects that the United States doesn't have control over. So back to the idea of Mercury and Venus being retrograde from March 15th to April 12th, when they're both retrograde together. Mercury and Venus they both rule over business, but in different capacities of business, and also media and entertainment. So during this period of time when Mercury and Venus will be retrograding over and near the fourth house, I think this is going to be a period of rethinking and the possible restructuring of media and news agencies and the entertainment conglomerates and the corporations, and the potential of breaking up of companies into more refined and efficient business models in order to survive in a completely different media landscape than when those corporations were founded. And we're already kind of hearing about this, the sale of Comcast breaking up into different factions. Well, this period of time when Mercury and Venus are both retrograde, expect to see the maybe announcements and also the actual implementation of what those changes are going to be. But these media companies having to rethink what they're doing and rethinking their values and their missions. And so also keep the equinox dates of March 19th to March 2022, keep that in mind, when Mars will one last time be touching that 8th house cusp before finally leaving Cancer and entering Leo on April 18th. So the equinox is always a very important energetic time. Keep in mind, Mars will be right on that 8th cusp at the equinox. So these are some of the key dates and the energies playing out in the coming months. And I just want to end on a couple of my own personal thoughts on this transit and the geopolitical and economic situation in general. So first, I didn't vote for Trump and I didn't vote for Harris. I didn't vote in the election, so I don't have a horse in this race, so to say. I'm about investigating and finding the truth and accepting that truth for whatever it is. And I like to speculate about what could happen using the astrology. So first of all, the United States, it's in a very precarious situation. So regardless of who was going to be elected, the situation was essentially the same. But I think that Harris would have basically done everything exactly the same as what Biden was doing, and even going further and kind of tripling down on what Biden was doing, basically being told what to do according to the ongoing plans of the entrenched Washington establishment. She would have just, it would have been the status quo, I believe. So Trump, on the other hand, he's a wild card. He's far less predictable. And I think what he does is he surrounds himself with as many options as possible. He's a very mercurial person. So he'll bring neocons, he'll bring Zionists in. He'll also bring people who are critical of neocons and Zionists, so that he doesn't get cornered into a single political policy. And you can't pin him down ideologically. He's not an ideological person. And he'll flip-flop whenever he feels like he needs to for any number of reasons. He basically sides with who will benefit him, and that is a typical political and kind of ruthless, egotistical business mindset. And that's why he has been so, you could say, successful throughout his life, but he's reached the highest levels of influence because he'll do what he needs to do to get where he wants to go. So I think the widespread changes that he is seeking to implement for the first few months of his presidency, I think a lot is going to go very haywire. And I don't think it's going to be possible for him to restrain himself, to have a kind of discipline, and to not succumb to the base emotional reactions when things don't go your way. And these are the remedies for the Mars retrograde debilitated transit, to be able to contain and to hold yourself into account, to restrain action when it's necessary, and to not be impulsive and to make decisions that you're going to later regret. So you have to study what the healthy Mars does, to not succumb to that quick decisions made in a very emotional state. I think that's going to be very hard for Trump to do, which could spell for a lot of tumultuous things taking place. So I think Trump will be using his army of lawyers to be making as many reforms domestically and internationally as possible, and trying and working to overturn as many regulations and reworking the federal bureaucracy using Elon Musk's new independent agency, the Department of Governmental Efficiency. So remember that an important theme and a major theme in Mars and retrograde and debilitated in Cancer is the attempt at excessive reform and wanting to make and re-strategize changes, but often these changes backfire and it causes a lot of chaos and unfortunately entrenches problems even deeper than it does resolving them. So let's hope that the government does become more efficient. But there's this nagging Mars in there until Mars leaves Cancer and enters into Leo in May. I think after May is going to be a much better time to actually start implementing the changes that you want to make. So that's unfortunate because a lot is going to be expected in this first period of time when things have much more propensity to go haywire. So if I were to advise Trump, I would say be disciplined, restrain yourself, don't make very many long-term decisions and erratic decisions until Mars gets into Leo. And do your best to hold back on impulses as best as you can, or as best as the administration can. Kind of be as cautious as possible in the first 100 days. So as you can tell, I could probably speculate and entertain possibilities about these strategies for endlessly, for so much time. It's very interesting to me. So we'll have to just sit back and we'll have to see what happens. And I think at the very least, the next few months are going to be extremely interesting, and especially, on the foreign policy side of the wars that, they're entering into their final stages of what's going to happen now. Full-blown nuclear war or winding down and strategically reorganizing how to move forward. And of course, on the domestic side, all of the different regulations and all of the sweeping changes that Trump says he's going to be making. So if you have any questions or if you have any comments about this video or the Mars retrograde debilitated period, please leave them. I'm very happy to read them, and thank you for watching.